In the chill of November 24th, 1971, the world of American aviation was about to encounter an enigma that would endure for decades. A story so strange and so perfectly cinematic that it would be retold endlessly in books, films, documentaries, and whispered conversations among conspiracy theorists. The tale of D.B. Cooper, the faceless man who vanished into the stormy night with a fortune strapped to his back, leaving behind only questions and shadows. To understand this mystery, one must first picture the United States in the early 1970s, a nation scarred by Vietnam, haunted by political distrust after Watergate's whispers began, and permeated with a restless sense of rebellion. The skies filled with hijackings, more than 40 in a single year. Because airport security was minimal, metal detectors were not yet standard, and men could board planes with briefcases that could conceal anything, even a bomb. So on that cold Wednesday before Thanksgiving, when a middle-aged man, dressed in a black suit, white shirt, and thin black tie, carrying a briefcase, approached the counter at Portland International Airport and purchased a one-way ticket on Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 305 to Seattle for $20 cash. Nothing seemed unusual. The man identified himself as Dan Cooper, though history would mistakenly immortalize him as D.B. Cooper after a sprint in the press. And as he walked calmly across the terminal and boarded the Boeing 727, nobody suspected. They were watching a legend in the making. He blended in with the businessmen of the day, ordering a bourbon and soda as the aircraft taxied down the runway, settling in a seat 18C with the unassuming demeanor of someone on a routine business trip. Yet tucked inside his briefcase was the promise of chaos. For not long after takeoff, as the engines hummed against the stormy skies of the Pacific Northwest, he summoned flight attendant Florence Schaffner with a simple gesture and handed her a note that initially she slipped into her pocket, thinking it was just another lonely passenger's phone number. But then Cooper leaned closer and whispered in a calm, almost polite voice, "Miss, you'd better read that note. I have a bomb." And with those words, the ordinary flight was transformed into one of the greatest unsolved crimes in American history. Florence read the note, meticulously written in block letters, stating he carried explosives and demanded $200,000 in cash along with 4 parachutes. Instructions that left no room for negotiation, and when asked to see proof, Cooper quietly cracked open his briefcase, just enough to reveal a tangle of red wires, batteries, and cylindrical objects that certainly looked like dynamite, convincing enough to freeze her with fear. Soon the cockpit was informed, and the pilots relayed the hijackers' demands to air traffic control, who in turn alerted the FBI and Northwest Orient Management. And as the passengers remained blissfully unaware of the drama unfolding, sipping drinks and chatting casually, the airline scrambled to gather the ransom. Stacks of worn $20 bills totaling $200,000, serial numbers meticulously recorded, and parachutes rushed from a nearby skydiving school, all while Flight 305 circled above Seattle for nearly 2 hours, burning fuel as authorities prepared. Cooper sat calmly in his seat, dark sunglasses concealing his eyes, chain-smoking Raleigh cigarettes, drinking bourbon with an eerie composure, never raising his voice, never harming anyone. His demeanor almost courteous, as if he were conducting a business transaction rather than orchestrating a crime. And when at last the plane descended into Seattle-Tacoma Airport, the passengers still had no idea they had been pawns in a high-stakes negotiation, told only that a mechanical issue required a delay. But as the aircraft taxied to a remote corner of the tarmac, police cars and FBI agents surrounded it. From a distance, unwilling to risk a confrontation, while a courier delivered the ransom and parachutes to the rear stairway, exchanged carefully by the crew under Cooper's strict instructions. Only then, after securing his prize, did Cooper release the 36 passengers unharmed, sending them into the night with no idea that they had just been part of an unfolding legend. And once the cabin was emptied, only the flight crew remained. Captain William Scott, First Officer William Radizak, Flight Engineer Harold Anderson, and Flight Attendant Tina Mucklow. Hostages now to the hijackers' next demand that the plane take off again, this time with the rear stair mechanism unlocked, flying low, under 10,000 feet. Landing gear down, flaps partially extended, at a slow 170 knots, a bizarre request that pushed the Boeing 727 to its limits, yet the pilots complied. For Cooper was in control, and as the rain hammered the fuselage and darkness consumed the horizon, the plane lumbered southward toward Reno, Nevada, its lights glimmering faintly against the storm clouds, while inside, Cooper methodically prepared for his escape, strapping the ransom into a bank bag, tying it to his body, securing the parachute with calculated movements, and at 8:13 p.m., somewhere over the rugged wilderness of southwestern Washington, the crew felt a sudden shift, a pressure change, and the tail end of the aircraft dipped, the unmistakable sign that Cooper had lowered the rear air stairs, and then, without hesitation, he stepped into the void, vanishing into the stormy night with his fortune, leaving behind only swirling turbulence and stunned silence. The aircraft continuing on to Reno, where it landed safely, its hijacker gone as though he had never existed. And thus began the legend, the investigation, and the endless speculation over what became of the man who would be known forever as D.B. Cooper. As the Boeing 727 lifted once more into the turbulent November sky, the strange theater of the D.B. Cooper hijacking entered its second act, a tense, almost cinematic unfolding of control and obedience, where a single man, faceless behind dark sunglasses, orchestrated the fate of seasoned aviators and federal authorities alike, demanding not violence, but precision. Cooper's instructions have been unervingly detailed. Fly south toward Mexico City, keep the altitude low, maintain a steady airspeed of 170 knots, landing gear partially down, flaps at 15 degrees, cabin lights dimmed, and most importantly, the rear stair mechanism unsealed so it could be deployed mid-flight, an eccentric checklist that baffled the flight crew, who realized they were dealing with someone who understood aviation intimately, perhaps a military paratrooper or a flight engineer, though his calm, businesslike manner defied the typical portrait of a desperate criminal. He neither cursed nor shouted. He smoked and sipped bourbon as though time itself bowed to him, while the passengers, now safe in Seattle, were only beginning to learn of the hijacking through news reports. Inside the cabin, only 5 souls remained. Captain Scott, First Officer Radizak, Flight Engineer Anderson, Flight Attendant Tina Mucklow, and the enigmatic Cooper, who kept his briefcase close but never displayed panic, never acted irrationally, instead conversing with Tina in a strangely courteous tone, instructing her to sit near him but not too close, asking her to read over his demands and confirm the parachute's readiness, even offering her a cigarette in a moment of bizarre civility. Outside the aircraft, radar stations tracked the slow-moving 727 as it lumbered through the storm, and chase planes attempted to tail it discreetly, though heavy clouds and rain made visibility nearly impossible, leaving the FBI blind to the exact moment of truth that was to come. Yet the entire operation carried the feel of inevitability, as if Cooper had rehearsed this role countless times in his mind. The ransom, $200,000 in worn $20 bills, secured in a bank bag, parachute straps tightened across his chest, his mind calculating the risks of darkness, rain, and rough terrain below. For the Pacific Northwest wilderness was no friend to careless adventurers. Its vast forests, rivers, and jagged mountains devoured the unprepared. But Cooper's confidence betrayed no doubt. The crew, tense but obedient, monitored their instruments, and, at around 8 p.m., the comm broke into action when Cooper ordered Tina to join the rest of the crew in the cockpit and not to emerge. His tone polite yet absolute, and she obeyed, leaving him alone in the cabin, a solitary silhouette against the dim cabin lights, the smell of cigarette smoke lingering like a spectral reminder of his presence. Then came the sound, the unmistakable metallic groan of the aft staircase being lowered into the rushing wind, causing pressure changes that rattled the cockpit instruments. At 8:13 p.m., the aircraft jolted violently, the tail dipping for a moment, And Captain Scott and his men exchanged silent glances. They knew. The hijacker was gone. He had stepped into the black void, into freezing rain and 200-mile-per-hour winds with nothing but a parachute and a fortune strapped to his body, vanishing into the wilderness below. From that moment, D.B. Cooper ceased to be a man and became a myth, because though the plane landed safely in Reno hours later, its cabin empty, its hijacker vanished, the question of whether he survived would forever divide investigators and fuel 1,000 theories. For some said he perished in the wilderness, broken upon the rocks, or drowned in icy rivers, his fortunes scattered like autumn leaves, while others whispered that he slipped into a new life, untraceable, faceless, and free, the ultimate outlaw who committed the perfect crime. And as law enforcement swarmed the aircraft collecting cigarette butts, Cooper's black clip-on tie, and fingerprints that led nowhere, they realized they had nothing. No name, no face, no body, only a storm and a mystery, a ghost who had melted into the night skies of America. In the days that followed Cooper's plunge into the storm, America found itself enthralled by the audacity of the crime, and the FBI launched what would become one of the most exhaustive manhunts in its history, codenamed NORJAC, short for Northwest Hijacking. Mobilizing hundreds of agents, helicopters, search dogs, and military personnel to scour the rugged wilderness of Washington and Oregon. Yet despite weeks of combing through forests, riverbanks, and mountain ridges, no trace of Cooper was found. No parachute, no body, not even a single bill from the ransom, leaving investigators bewildered. The region where he supposedly landed was inhospitable, a mosaic of thick pine forests, icy rivers, and treacherous terrain, and many experts insisted no man could have survived the jump in such conditions, with freezing rain, 200-mile-per-hour winds, pitch-black night, and inadequate gear. For Cooper wore only a business suit, loafers, and a thin trench coat, hardly the attire of a professional paratrooper. Yet others argued that his calm demeanor, technical knowledge of the Boeing 727's rear air stairs, and insistence on specific flight conditions hinted at military experience. Perhaps a paratrooper from Vietnam or a veteran of clandestine operations, fueling speculation that he might have landed safely and vanished into obscurity. The FBI gathered evidence meticulously. Cooper's black clip-on tie, which bore a few microscopic particles later suspected to be from aerospace. Manufacturing his cigarette butts that were carelessly destroyed before DNA technology could be applied, and the detailed serial numbers of every single bill in the ransom, distributed to banks, casinos, and businesses across the nation, in hopes that circulation would betray him. But not a single bill surfaced for nearly a decade. In the days that followed Cooper's plunge into the storm, America found itself enthralled by the audacity of the crime, and the FBI launched what would become one of the most exhaustive manhunts in its history, codenamed NORJAC, short for Northwest Hijacking. Mobilizing hundreds of agents, helicopters, search dogs, and military personnel to scour the rugged wilderness of Washington and Oregon. Yet despite weeks of combing through forests, riverbanks, and mountain ridges, no trace of Cooper was found. No parachute, no body, not even a single bill from the ransom, leaving investigators bewildered. The region where he supposedly landed was inhospitable, a mosaic of thick pine forests, icy rivers, and treacherous terrain, and many experts insisted no man could have survived the jump in such conditions, with freezing rain, 200-mile-per-hour winds, pitch-black night, and inadequate gear. For Cooper wore only a business suit, loafers, and a thin trench coat, hardly the attire of a professional paratrooper. Yet others argued that his calm demeanor, technical knowledge of the Boeing 727's rear air stairs, and insistence on specific flight conditions hinted at military experience. Perhaps a paratrooper from Vietnam or a veteran of clandestine operations, fueling speculation that he might have landed safely and vanished into obscurity. The FBI gathered evidence meticulously. Cooper's black clip-on tie, which bore a few microscopic particles later suspected to be from aerospace. manufacturing his cigarette butts that were carelessly destroyed before DNA technology could be applied, and the detailed serial numbers of every single bill and the ransom, distributed to banks, casinos, and businesses across the nation, in hopes that circulation would betray him. But not a single bill surfaced for nearly a decade, intensifying the aura of a phantom. Suspicion soon fell upon a handful of men who seemed to fit the profile, among them Richard Floyd McCoy, a Vietnam veteran who in 1972 executed a nearly identical hijacking using a 727 in parachutes, only to be caught with a ransom and later killed in a prison escape attempt. Yet the FBI concluded his age and appearance did not match Cooper's descriptions, eliminating him as a suspect, though many amateur sleuths continued to argue otherwise. Another name was Kenneth Christensen, a former Northwest Airlines employee and World War II paratrooper, whose brother claimed he once confessed privately to being Cooper, and while circumstantial details seemed to fit, his knowledge of the airline, his military past, his sudden post-1971 wealth, the FBI found no definitive evidence linking him to the crime. Dwayne Weber, yet another suspect, allegedly confessed on his deathbed to his wife that he was Cooper, and she later produced diaries and notes, suggesting he had hidden secrets from his past. But again, the evidence was thin and inconclusive. Countless others were named. Lynn Doyle Cooper, a former logger and Korean War vet, William Gossett, a law student turned survivalist, even suggestions that Cooper might have been a Canadian skydiver or an inside man from Boeing itself. But every lead eventually fizzled. Every theory collapsed under the weight of doubt, and the case grew colder. Then, in 1980, a strange twist reignited the mystery. When an 8-year-old boy camping with his family near the Columbia River unearthed a decaying bundle of cash, $5, $820 bills, matching Cooper's ransom by serial number, buried in the sand at a place called Tina Bar, some 20 miles downstream from Cooper's presumed jump zone, a discovery that raised more questions than answers. Had the money washed downstream accidentally, suggesting Cooper died in the wilderness and the river carried away his fortune? Or had he deliberately buried it as a decoy, a red herring to mislead investigators? Forensic experts debated endlessly, but the truth remained elusive. Over the decades, Cooper became less a criminal and more a folk hero, an outlaw in the tradition of Jesse James or Billy the Kid, admired for his audacity, his politeness during the crime, and his ability to humiliate federal authorities by disappearing without a trace. His legend kept alive in books, films, comic books, and even songs. While the FBI, despite interviewing over 1,000 suspects and spending millions of dollars, remained unable to provide closure, their only certainty being that the man known as D.B. Cooper had vanished in a thin air, leaving nothing but a shadow that taunted every investigator who tried to catch him. And so the legend of D.B. Cooper did not fade with time, but instead grew, transforming from a single hijacking into America's only unsolved case of air piracy, a mystery that seemed to mock law enforcement and tantalize the public imagination. For as the decades passed, Cooper became less a criminal and more a phantom outlaw, a man who defied gravity, the FBI, and death itself, slipping into mythology. Books speculated endlessly, documentaries revisited his every move, and Hollywood found inspiration in his story, embedding Cooper into films, television, even music, turning him into a cultural icon, a symbol of rebellion against authority, a modern Robin Hood who stole from the system and harmed no one. For he never fired a shot, never terrorized the passengers, and released them all unharmed, making him a strangely noble figure in the gallery of American crime. Yet behind the folklore, the FBI continued its pursuit relentlessly, tracking every lead, testing new forensic methods, chasing suspects across decades. But the trail always ended in dust, until July 2016, when after 45 years the Bureau officially closed the case, declaring that investigative resources would no longer be spent on the mystery, an announcement that outraged and saddened many who had dedicated their lives to solving it, yet only deepened the aura of Cooper's triumph, for he remained untouchable, uncatchable. Unconfirmed, conspiracy theories flourished in the vacuum. Some insisted Cooper survived, melted into society under a new identity, perhaps living quietly in small-town anonymity or even abroad, enjoying his secret fortune until his dying day. Others argued he perished that very night, his body lost to rivers or devoured by wilderness, the money scattered, with only the Tina Bar bundle as silent testimony. Still others believe the entire event might have been an inside job, orchestrated by someone with intimate knowledge of Boeing aircraft and airline protocols, a rogue employee testing the boundaries of possibility. Amateur sleuths scoured every scrap of evidence, analyzing weather reports, flight paths, and parachute details, building elaborate profiles of a man who seemed both reckless and calculating, ordinary and extraordinary. Meanwhile, pop culture refused to let him go. Cooper appeared in songs by rock bands, in the cult TV series Twin Peaks with the character of Agent Dale Cooper, in films like Without a Paddle, referenced in Breaking Bad, and countless novels and comics, ensuring his face, or rather his lack of one, remained etched in the American psyche. Even scientific advances could not exhume him. Though in 2001 DNA was extracted from Cooper's tie, it yielded no match and cigarette butts that might have given answers had been discarded decades earlier, sealing away what could have been a revelation. Cooper thus remained not only an unsolved case, but a metaphor, a reflection of America's appetite for mystery, for rebels who defy order and vanish into the night. And perhaps that is why the story endures, why even today, in internet forums, podcasts, and late-night debates, people argue passionately. Who was D.B. Cooper? Was he a desperate man who died in the wilderness? A genius criminal who escaped with a perfect plan? Or simply a ghost story we tell ourselves about freedom and defiance? The truth may never surface, for time has buried the evidence. Witnesses are gone, the money long, dissolved into history. And yet the myth thrives because the greatest mysteries are not those that are solved, but those that remain open, luring us with questions that cannot be answered. And so, when we think of that stormy night in 1971, of the Boeing 727 cutting through rain clouds, of the calm man in a black suit lowering the rear stairs and stepping into darkness, we realize that D.B. Cooper is not just a man, but a legend, a riddle written in the sky, a symbol of the unknowable, and in that void between certainty and speculation lies his immortality, forever drifting on the winds of the Pacific Northwest, a name whispered with awe and curiosity. D.B. Cooper, the hijacker who vanished into thin air and was never seen again.